line, but we can try to take a couple questions or comments from the audience. Yes?
Hi, Rosalie from Massachusetts Trinity College. I cite Alice Dreger's academically rigorous work all the time in my own work. She doesn't know who I am, but I know who she is. And I'm just wondering, what gives transgender, and I'm a transgender person, that's a label I take, what gives any transgender person the right to abrogate someone else's First Amendment right to freedom of speech just because they hold an unpopular minority view? In my opinion, the person that you're arguing against, I completely agree with you. I completely agree it's bunk, ridiculous science and shouldn't be classified as such. I got that. What gives us the right to censor it just because we don't like it?
The fact that libel, defamation laws, and other certain forms of speech aren't necessarily protected. The First Amendment is not absolute. First off, I don't see, even though, I teach at they were both state employees, we're not actually the state. Only the state or the federal government can get rid of the Constitution, abrogate it.
Right, censorship is an act of the state.
Right. The fact that we are saying what we believe, and that might ultimately have the effect of a populist squash of this garbage, that doesn't make it a trashing of First Amendment. I don't think anybody is advocating that Alice Dreger be charged with anything criminally.
I actually didn't mention her. I was mentioning people. You got it. I was just wondering what makes, if you say your opinion and he says his opinion, how is that? It's just opinion and opinion.
Are
Well,
all
except when we
opinions
get into
equally
factual
valid?
statements, that's the
Yeah.
problem. I mean, if it were matters of opinion, that would be, interesting, although apparently there have been lawsuits threatened for statements of opinion, actually by Alice Dreger herself in Women's Studies listserv, I quoted. But actually, and in fact, that is, to my knowledge, the only time that any attempt has been made to even invoke the coercive power of the state in this discussion.
I'm not sure a civil lawsuit actually knows,
Yeah, it has actually.
That test at the end of the book, 192 to 194, that is tantamount to J. Michael Paley encouraging people to commit defamation. The evaluation based on administering that test is almost inherently going to be incorrect. And where you go from that, saying, oh, I evaluated this person, therefore I know she's autogynephilia, whatever. That is at least one step towards actionable defamation, and he's sanctioning that. That doesn't necessarily mean he is actually, subject to any particular legal action himself. What I'm saying is, and are all opinions equal? Hell no.
More importantly, there's a difference between statements of opinion and statements of fact. Here, Bailey does not just say, his book is not just a statement of opinion. He makes it very clear. He's saying this is the science. He makes it very clear throughout. With, he covers it with words like our study and stuff that we're supposed to disregard now that he's been people have tried to hold him accountable to the standard that he invokes in his own book. But when somebody makes statements of fact, they can be true, they can be false. When they are false, there is certainly nothing wrong with correcting it and wondering exactly how it got published in the first place by a publishing house whose name speaks for itself usually, and it generally provides the imprimatur of the National Academy of Science. I mean, what we're talking about here is statements of fact, not just statements of opinion. And the invocation of a highly authoritarian discourse, more importantly, the discourse of science. Of course, again, we're not supposed to remember that because now it's inconvenient. Now all that science talk really, is just sort of a postmodern exercise in, unreliable narrators in his book. But in any case, there's nothing, first of all, there's no censorship going on. Second of all, it's not just statements of opinion. I really don't see it, and I don't think anyone here, I didn't hear anyone advocate censorship except in my quotations of Alice Dreger, who seems to be more or less, that's the closest that we talk, actually. I've quoted somebody who advocated censorship of us through the invocation of the coercive means provided by the state. Now, the fact that anyone who actually sued for the things that Alice Drager called defamatory and libelous would be subject to Rule 11 sanctions, and their lawyer probably would end up before the bar committee, doesn't actually change the fact that that threat was intended to have a chilling effect. The assumption, either the person who made the threat didn't actually know that, or, and was led into it by ethicists apparently who didn't like her very much, or she hoped that the recipient of the threat didn't get it. That's the closest we've come to censorship in this entire thing. The rest of it is called criticism. It's not the same thing, even though they are in the same section of the dictionary.
So,